Uh, yes, hi everybody. Welcome to a new Rebalance talk. In this occasion with Mark Coeckelbergh, which is philosopher, and also with Andrea Ricci, which is the coordinator of the Rebalance project. Mark is a professor of philosophy of media and technology at the University of Vienna. He's involved in interdisciplinary collaborations in mostly in the ethical impact assessment of research and innovation. He's a really interesting guy for us because he proposes to use the concept of time, process, and narrative to conceptualize artificial intelligence and its relevant impact on human lives and society. He argues that artificial intelligence processes and narratives shape our time and link past, present, and future in particular ways that are ethically and politically significant. We would like to discuss with you, Mark, mostly your future scenarios regarding technology and human life, particularly in transport and communication. So we expect to talk a lot of the autonomous vehicle, but not only in relation to transportation or communication, but more in general. So we are interested to know what is at this moment your thoughts about what social and environmental impacts we may expect, what consequences for human beings, for human condition of the evolution of technology. And at the end, we would like to ask you what kind of good society and good politics with technology do you imagine, do you like for the future, which is a question that you asked yourself in a number of articles, and we would like you to share with us your views of this question at this point. Let me begin by one question about the autonomous vehicles, of course. We know that most people believe that autonomous vehicles are better than vehicles that human beings can drive, because autonomous vehicles remove human errors. They are free from human errors. So we know that an autonomous vehicle is more useful, not only because it's more safer, also because it's more efficient, identifying the right path in each moment. So we can substitute taxi drivers and bus drivers by robots with much problem. And then the question is, why not substituting as well doctors and judges, since intelligent algorithms will assure full informed, rational, and objective decisions, free from the cognitive errors or flaws typical from human beings, like those, for instance, investigated by psychologists like Kahneman. This may happen, and the first question is if you believe this will happen, like it or not. And the second question is what it means for a human being to live in a world free from human errors. Easy questions to begin with, Mark.
Yeah, thank you for it. Yeah, it's a big question, and I think for me there is something problematic about seeing human beings and their capacities in terms of errors, in terms of not really living up to what is supposed to be the right kind of standards. Of course, human beings make mistakes, and they're not perfect, but to then say that machines are perfect presumes that emotional reasoning, for example, is by definition something that counts as an error, that is not good, and so on. And I think that assumption is problematic. I think emotions, of course, can be a problem, but emotions can also really help us to judge as human beings and to make a better judgment than if we would just use only reasoning, because emotions are often pointing us to what is important for us. what is at stake in a particular ethical situation. And I think that the technologies are bad at this or cannot even do it in principle, in the sense that for machines, nothing is really at stake. We are existential beings, yeah, and for us, we are self-conscious, and we have this capacity to reflect, but also feel what is important, what is not important, what is problematic and not. And I think this helps us to be better beings, also ethically speaking. And machines lack that. So I think it's a problem if we propose technologies like self-driving cars as a full replacement of human beings. I do think that technologies can help us to do more things, to do things faster, to assist with things that we humans are very slow in. For example, computation, right? So for that reason, we shouldn't be against machines. But then to say that, machines should be there for correcting human errors, for avoiding the human itself as a kind of error, I think that's very problematic.
Andrea, you would like to add something to this comment?
Yeah, well, yes, I think that this issue of error is extremely sensitive, of course, because my concern personally is that whether the freedom of choice is at stake. I always quote a friend of mine who used to speak about his own country, so I can quote him even if it's a nasty quote. He was a Swiss guy, and he used to say that Switzerland is a country where everything which is not forbidden is compulsory, which is a little bit of a nasty definition, but it conveys pretty well the idea that if you regulate everything in technology, clearly by many people is seen as the regulator of choices of behaviors, then you do run the risk, at least in my view, of threatening the freedom of choice. So that's my immediate concern about this issue. On the other hand, of course, there's the idea of the old story about learning from errors. Okay, so if you're not allowed to make errors, maybe you're missing the opportunity of learning something. Mm-hmm. The answer to that from technologists would be yes, but the machine is learning as well. So they are learning by working. So leave it all to them and everything will be fine. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that typically the ways that humans create knowledge of themselves is and of the world is to try things, to experiment, to improvise, and we learn from experience. And machine learning learns from a given amount of data. But these data represent also only a part of reality and also part of the ethical situation only. And so once we have human experience, I think it's a richer source of knowledge. It can also be historical, just like data can be historical, but it has this sensitivities for situational knowledge. It has also embodied knowledge. And so the specific way that we humans learn is unique and contains some knowledge that cannot be gained by machine learning. And again, because of that reason, I think it's good to combine both kinds of knowledge. I mean, we also cannot do everything a machine does. We cannot analyze so many data at the same time. In a very short time window. So I think we need both, but we definitely need this human experience, because in the end, from human experience also comes the human wisdom. Human wisdom is based on making mistakes, on trying out things. I think that kind of situational and embodied and also emotionally mediated knowledge has always been an important guiding instrument for humanity and for also every one of us. So I think the future is in that combination of different types of knowledge and different types of decision making also.
Do you think this is going to happen? This is likely. This is a scenario. Do you think this is going to happen?
Or
we are moving to a transhumanist scenario, like it or not, where machines are going to be taking our bodies, even our minds, and we are going to become something in between machines and human beings, and like it or not?
Well, I think that's not a good way of making the future and of imagining the future. So let me first say that I do think that we use more and more automation technologies already today, and we are already a kind of cyborgs in the sense that we really rely on technologies to do to lead our daily lives, our work lives, our private lives. In that sense, we are already in a situation where technology and human beings are very closely connected. However, the transhumanist imaginaries of a future where we will totally melt with machines, or where we will be superseded by intelligent agents, by AI and so on, I think that's a future that is a science fiction future. It's not a future that can guide us. It's also a future that's based on some assumptions. For example, the one I already said, that humans are an error and need to be basically replaced by machines. But also the assumption that human beings are themselves a kind of machines and can therefore be upgraded. Of course, there's a cybernetic aspect to our human bodies and the way we, in an active ways, connect to our environment. But we are not machines, and we are certainly not like computers or like artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence itself is also not a thing or a being. It's a data science process and a range of technologies that enable us to analyze data, that enable us to predict, and so on. So yeah, I think the transhumanist future that they sketch is problematic in all these different ways. There's also a kind of it continues a kind of thinking in Western culture where there's fantasies about an end time, a kind of eschatology where we move towards a certain point and then everything will be different. Whatever one says about this kind of ideas in a religious context, I think in the context of technology, it needs to be critically looked at, like what kind of narrative is told here. Could we also have other narratives, narrative of change? I think change has to be taught, change has to be conceptualized, but perhaps in a different way than where humans and technology, a narrative of humans and technology doing things together, a gradual change also, I think, is much more likely based on what we see in the history. Of course, sometimes we're really surprised. For example, the internet, few people saw that coming, and so technological changes can be quite drastic and radical, but not so drastic and radical that suddenly humans are no longer in the picture. For me, technology is always partly human. The technology, AI is not humans, but it's human. It's made by us. We are always involved in technological action. So there is no need to have this kind of narratives where AI in the form of a kind of robot or huge system takes over the world.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk for a while on the natural errors that technology try to solve, not just the errors in our way to take decisions, but also on the ways nature works itself. So death can be understood, conceptualized as a problem by transhumanists. So like the bodies are not good enough, they are not perfect, can be improved, and death therefore is a problem that can be solved. This is what Ray Kurzweil, which is the chief engineer in Google, believes, and the idea of the singularity and so on, that this is going to happen. He says in 34 years. You said digitalize or die. As the two extreme way, or die. That this is not a natural error, but part of life. So maybe you can further explore this concept.
With digitize or die, I didn't mean to defend the transhumanist view that you just sketched. What I meant was that because of the pandemic, and of course also because the technological advances, we almost have to, digitalize, because it's the only way to survive in a pandemic, to get an income, for example, to communicate with people. And also in general, I think that this digital evolution is not something that can or should be stopped. But the transhumanist idea is a very specific idea of digitalization, namely the digitalization of the human, where the human body is left behind, and where the mind is digitalized, is transferred to a digital sphere. Again, I think we have very problematic assumptions in here. The assumption is, first of all, a normative one is the Platonic one, which says that the human body is a prison of the soul, is something that we are stuck in this mortal body, and we have to get rid of that. So then digitalization of the mind leaves behind the body and finally moves to a spiritual sphere, but spiritual understood as a digital sphere. Also, another assumption related to that is a Cartesian one, where you basically think of human beings as minds that are in bodies, but the bodies and the minds are separate. So that goes against the idea of embodied cognition, which is in interdisciplinary science and cognitive science a very common mainstream way of thinking about human cognition nowadays. But this is totally denied by such a Cartesian and Platonic view, because it's assumed that basically the mind can survive without a body, that the mind doesn't need a body, and that's not true. Think of also the technologies we have now. To some extent, the text we have digitally on internet, the images and so on, are a kind of extension of the mind and an externalization in another medium. However, this writing of the text and also the reading of the text, because people forget the reading, is something that we do as embodied beings. So when we read a text, when I look at the screen, I'm not in a virtual world. I am a human being that is embodied, that has a certain posture, that makes certain movements, that has a biological body that gives all kinds of signals and so on. So for me, it's important to replace this transhumanist view of the human being with another view of the human being that I think is more realistic and is more closer to, I think, better conceptualizes how we are as human beings. And then from there one can think then, okay, what is then the role of technology? How can we combine technology in a good way with that mortal, vulnerable body. I wrote a book about, it's called Human Being at Risk, where I say that we are these vulnerable beings, existentially speaking, but that we always try to overcome this with technology. Mm-hmm. In that sense, transhumanism is a hyper scientific kind of effort. But when we do this, we also create new vulnerabilities, and we don't get rid of that body. We remain embodied, and we remain vulnerable, and we create new vulnerabilities through technology. And once we accept that, we can then again ask the question, well, what kind of vulnerabilities do we think are acceptable? How can we reduce them? But to think that we can be digitalized, that we can be uploaded, our mind can be uploaded, and that in that way we can escape the human condition, I think is illusionary and dangerous. And instead, we should use technology to improve the human condition, but accepting that basic existential fact of mortality and vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, do you like to add something to? We don't can hear you. Maybe your microphone is muted.
Well, an ambulance a minute ago, so I had muted myself because I didn't want you to listen to my ambulance going down the road. Now, I had a question which is maybe directly related to that, but which I'd like to ask Mark anyway. This is about, I mean, there's a lot of discussion right now about many or most of AI devices and applications unavoidably incorporating human biases. Mm-hmm. Because in the end, what an AI device does is what we have, at least in the beginning, taught it, told them to, or it, or whatever to do. And I keep reading an ever increasing number of comments about this issue, incorporated automatic and incorporation of biases in AI devices. And I would be curious to understand whether you think this is only one of the teething problems that AI, when it will be developing further, will be able to solve, or if it is something which is unavoidable. And what are the consequences of that? Because to some extent, maybe incorporating a bias is a good thing if it reflects our moral values, if it reflects somehow our model. I'm being provocative here, but I don't know. I really don't know. I'd like to have your comment on this.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think bias is a significant and important topic. Of course, there is also bias in general in society. So it shouldn't be presented that AI is the kind of the bad thing as such. It's for me, technology is always connected to society and culture. So what AI does is, of course, to kind of suck up the bias that's already there in society, and also add additional bias in case that the algorithm is biased, in case that what the human beings do create bias, in case that the teams that work also with this development of algorithms, in case that they are not very diverse, for example. And so there are all kinds of problems related to AI, but they are always connected to problems of bias in society. And to solve these problems, I think we can, it's wrong to think that we can create a totally objective technology. Again, that would be the idea of technology doesn't make errors if we design it right. But of course, it can be designed better, and we can avoid certain biases. But indeed, perhaps some biases we want to introduce, but then biases that are seen as creating more just society. once we accept that bias is part of the picture, and when we try to also reveal what kind of biases could be created, I think we can make choices, and we can say, for example, well, the algorithm, for example, reflects previous hires from a company, and it turns out that this is biased against women and in favor of men. Then we can work on the AI system in such a way that a positive bias is created towards women, for example. Whether this particular example is a good one, or whether we think that is the way to go, the point is that total avoidance of bias is not possible. And once we are aware of the biases that we create or can create, have created in the past, we can do it differently, and we can influence also society in that way. For example, if Google would change its search function in a certain way that deals with gender biases, then the result would, could be not an objective state of affairs, not a neutral algorithm, but an algorithm that is ethically and politically active in a way. And we just need, as a society, as a company, and so on, we need to think about what kind of direction should we go there, what kind of ethics, what kind of politics should we make with our technologies, because we're going to do that anyway. So I think once we create with developers and with companies and governments more awareness about this, we can then have democratic discussions about what is for us justice, what is for us equality, and so on. And then translate that to technology development.
Mm-hmm. Let's move to cultural issues, because you have defined it, or you have described technology often as performance. You have been explored the romantic frame that helps us or determines our way of understanding and living technology. Mm-hmm. Even the ethics of the magician, ones you refer to. But we tend to see technology as something rational, as a product of science and business interests, and maybe the romantic view, the view of the imagination, the irrationality is needed, because sometimes, or maybe often, or maybe always, the engineers doing technology, they do that because of curiosity, because they like to do that, because they don't care of the meaning or the usefulness. Then some inventions then are used, others are not used, but the way of doing things is just for doing things. I don't know if you also agree with Hannah Arendt when she said that people that are doing things don't understand really what they are doing, so we have to forgive them because they don't know what they are doing, and we have to think on this not irrational, but this more imaginative and romantic way to understand technology as a pure human activity.
Absolutely. It's a human and cultural activity, and I've tried to conceptualize in 3 different ways. One by using Wittgenstein, saying that technology use is like language use. It is embedded in activities and games and a form of life. A second way is through Ricoeur and narrative theory, saying that our technologies also narrate, they tell stories, and they structure our stories and the story of our life. And a third way is to say technology uses a kind of performance, and in that way it's a social activity, it's an embodied and kinetic activity, and it's an activity in which humans play a role, in which technologies also co-write our scripts and our choreographies, what we do with technology. And so these three ways, which are in using word and things, technology, games, in the book I wrote with Russell Reyers about recur and technology ethics, and also, of course, in Move by Machines. I think these ways show that that technologies are human and cultural activities, and the quote by Hannah Arendt, I think, further confirms this, because what we do with technology is not just this rational activity, it is a human and cultural thing. And that also means that we have problems concerning ignorance, indeed. And these problems are partly technical, for example, with machine learning, in a way that the user of machine learning doesn't know what he or she is doing, because to that extent that if the machine learning uses deep learning, where not every step of the decision or recommendation making is clear, so it's transparent, and so it's technically problematic, but also human beings, they do not always understand, and the types of ignorance there. I analyzed that within the kind of Aristotelian framework, saying that for responsible technologies, we need to be in control and voluntarily want what we do, but we also need to know what we're doing. And if we don't know what we're doing, the problem is we also cannot explain it to other human beings. I think technology, in a sense, is also should involve and is also a communicative exercise. So it's not only the instrumental reason, but also the communicative reason. And so we need to explain to others and argue why something happened and why it's good that we do things in the way we do. And if we cannot do that, then I think we act with technology in an irresponsible way. We do not respond to the other who can rightly ask us for an explanation. That's what I've called a relational view of responsibility. That's why I think that we need to, of course, work on these different types of ignorance to turn them into more knowledgeable states, so we have better conditions for responsible technology development and technology use. But that being said, I think we also need to accept a kind of tragic element, a tragic dimension to technology use and to all human activities. We can try to gain control, we can try to get clarity, but I think it's pretty sick to achieve a purity there, or want to achieve a purity there, because there is no such thing. Human lives are also always partly at the mercy of bigger forces than ourselves, at the mercy of what others do, what nature does, and so on. And so we have to accept the limits of human agency and control in order to have a sort of better view of responsibility with technology.
Mm-hmm.
So personally, I learned there from the Greek tragedies. I think they are exemplary in showing, bringing out this kind of element. And I think in modernity, we need that kind of lessons.
Andrea, what do you think?
Yes, picking on this, I'm an engineer by training, so I have one of those famous biases, and picking on this quotation, I think that the important thing is not so much not to know what you're doing, but to be aware of the fact that you don't know it. There's a major difference there. I mean, you can, this goes back, Mark, to what you were saying about limits. I mean, recognition of the limits and building upon the limits. If I may also remember an anecdote, when I was a very young engineer, that's probably more than 40 years ago, I had a mentor who was I consider him very aspiring person. He was not an engineer. And he told me, look, whatever production process, you can divide it basically in 4 phases, defining the objectives and then designing something that meets the objectives and then actually producing it and then controlling it. And if you look at the role of automation and of technology in general, it goes the other way, bottom up. It starts with the easiest part, which is controlling, because that's indeed fairly automatic and mechanical. Well, then it goes up to with robots and whatever else to the production step. And then we are, at the time he was saying, we are now entering into the stage where automation allows also to automate the design part. So what we will be left out with is spending all our time on fighting about what we want. Is it still true, or even that last stage we are about to delegate it to computers and AI?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, of course, I understand for practical purposes that people follow this kind of schemes. But if we look at it philosophically, I think there's almost a kind of Platonic design idea that first there's pure idea form, and then this design, this plan, and so on is implemented into the material world. And I'm interested in sort of in critiquing that by saying, well, there's a lot that is given, there are a lot of constraints, and so we don't solve a problem in that way. I think there are already solutions, there are already all kind of things that are happening, and then of course there is an intervention of the engineer, of the designer, and there is some outcome of that. But I described this as a process as a poetic process, in the sense of a process of making, where the human being and also the ideas that this human being has is the human being is a participant in that process, and it's not necessarily the author, the full controller. Not only because there are other people and entities like companies that want something, right? So it's not, we shouldn't think of this as technology innovation as this one guy or one woman that has a great idea. But not only because there are other people, but also because there's the material constraints. There is all kind of there's a whole world within which this kind of product grows also, and the ideas around it. So I use biological metaphors here and process thinking because I think that puts the human designer and engineer more in her place, in the sense that he or she is part of this process, is an important part of the process, but to draw such a clear line from this person with an idea to and problem solving, as it were, in the mind to a finished product, I think it's not it doesn't sufficiently describe this sort of richer, bigger process that is again more holistic, where there's all kind of meanings and material conditions and so on that play a role in that. And of course also a social context where there are certain givens, a society and a culture also. A product that's made in California will sort of carry a certain cultural aura with it, and if we use it in Barcelona or in Vienna, there is some potential for friction or some potential for not full congruency there. So yeah, I think once we understand innovation and technology use in this more holistic and process-based way, I think we get to another picture, and one that I think is potentially richer than just this very linear and more platonic way of thinking about it.
Mark, what kind of human beings we are becoming in the technologic society? Because we have the model by Byung-Chul Han of the productive being, somebody that imposes itself, himself, herself to move fast, to do a lot of things efficiently, never is efficient enough, and keeps moving all the time, let's say, like companies which are competing against other companies everywhere, all the time, for anything. So it's a matter of being there before anyone else. And then we do this not running faster, we do this doing many different things, one after the other, not finishing maybe everything, so we don't have a narrative of our lives. So this kind of human being, which seems to me close to the last man of Nietzsche, you know, somebody which is not very clever, but is happy and silly and and standardized, and follows kind of a standard life with similar desires of the other people. So do you think the kind of people we are becoming is well defined by these rather negative and pessimistic models, or do you have a more positive understanding?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a very interesting one. There's a lot to say about it. I think it's true that there is a danger that technology infantilizes us, that it's always the claim that it makes things easier for us, and so it treats us like, you know, a child that is made happy by buying it an ice cream, and it tries to create human beings that are like that. I also think that we are living in a society that emphasizes competition, at least here in Western societies. So it's the way that technology and society go together creates this feeling of speed, this feeling of also the feeling of not being enough. I've just written a book called Self-Improvement Technologies for the Soul, and it's very much about that we are made to feel anxious that we are not good enough. Günther Anders, you know, to come back to the time of Arendt, and he was of course related to her. Günther Anders said, like, the technologies are too beautiful and perfect, and we feel bad. We have a Promethean shame, as he called it. In the book, I criticize. I don't take up Anders, but I criticize this idea that we always have to be better. And of course, under a capitalist system, it means better workers and better, entities to be exploited for our data. So yeah, this kind of beings are created by technology, beings that are not, on the one hand, the childish beings, are also the beings that are never happy with themselves because they feel the pressure to work harder, to perform better, and so on. So we are in this kind of crazy split between these two different personalities and beings. And I don't think that this is a necessity. I think that in contrast to Jacques Ellul and other people in the past who were quite pessimistic about technology, Heidegger to some extent, but not necessarily. I think in contrast to this kind of pessimistic views, we can have a more optimistic view of technology, that the problem is not technology itself, but the way that it is linked to our particular society and culture. If that's the case, we can also take social action, political action to change things. We can also design technologies in a better way, in a way that doesn't create that kind of subjects and that kind of selves. So let's do that. Let's create better ones, but of course keeping in mind the limits. Yeah, we cannot totally create new beings. We cannot totally create a new society even, and we have to work also with the good things that are already there. But this is the direction that I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm. Andre, I think you tend to agree with that.
Yes, well, there would be plenty of things to raise here, but if we talk about competition, I'm not against competition, the principle of competition, and of course it's impossible not to recognize that the important role of technology in serving competitive objectives. The main question again is competing for what? And I think here we have to face the fact that there is a fundamental flaw in the current socioeconomic paradigm, which is deeply embedded, even unconsciously in most of us, and we're competing for efficiency, productivity, for profit. So what we do with technology rather than technology itself. On the other hand, there was also an interesting comment made recently by a prominent philologist. Can you say philologist? Philologist? Yes. Who was commenting about the difference between innovation and progress. And this was very sharp. It was very clearly said. It said we now are all enthralled with the idea that everything which is innovative is good. But that's not true. There's plenty of innovation, which may be very new and recognizable and such, and then can allow to make companies a lot of money because simply the fact that it is new and we're pursuing it only because we can do it. But it doesn't mean it's a progress. It doesn't mean it has a visible and measurable advantage for society as a whole. So this is a very simple concept. I'm even almost ashamed to put it on the table, but I think it is something which is not well understood and somehow translated into a change of paradigm, both at the individual level and, more importantly, probably at the level of the socioeconomic paradigm, which is dominant now, which is a completely different thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for these comments. I agree with you. I mean, competition in itself is not bad. The question is what aim. That's true, and also to, I would say, the extent of the competition. I mean, I think there needs to be a balance between competition and solidarity and so on, and other values. Yeah? But yes, what do we want to compete for? I think within ethics, for example, one could say, like, let's compete for virtue. Let's try to be the most virtuous persons, and let's try to develop technologies that enable us to be more virtuous, and who can then be the best make the best technologies. So I think that's a more positive view. Of course, there the problem is that sometimes there can be only virtue signaling, that you, for example, in a more American society where you show how good you are, we have to always show, and that's also a pressure, and it's not always doesn't always mean that there is a sort of more sustained virtuous development. But so this is a different discussion. But in any case, I think we can have a positive competition for the most ethical technology and so on. And I think especially in Europe, we can do that. We can we have the right kind of culture for pushing that and in that way competing. And so that is, I think, a good kind of competition. The idea of progress is very true. I mean, one should criticize that, and one should ask again, what kind of progress do we want? And if it's the kind of progress that also in transhumanism, but also in modernity, where all the old is seen as bad, and the new is seen only as faster and more efficient and so on. I think that is indeed problematic, and I think we should make a difference between the desire of engineers and scientists to play, to find something, to invent something and so on. I think that can be very useful, but one should not justify that by saying like, yeah, it's going to be necessarily better for society. So we could split the two. Yeah, people should absolutely experiment and play and make things, but we should have a discussion together, like not just engineers or not just politicians, but about like what kind of technology do we need as a society. And I think more and more engineers also and scientists understand that this ethical goals and that this is important. So I'm optimistic there that we can do that, that we can have more and more sort of development of good technologies for good societies. I think that those in the technology world who are leading now, that more and more people understand this.
Mm-hmm. So Mark, if I'm not simplifying, or if I'm simplifying, you correct me, but I see your position kind of a middle ground between the transhumanism, the idea of the interest and the idea of optimizing processes and pushing things to the limit, or the primitivism, utopia of back to the forest or back to nature, or back to kind of regressive idea of the past. I think that by reading you and listening to you, you talk a lot about good life, about ethics in the sense of values, such as you mentioned in this conversation, solidarity, so respect. We can add prudence or tolerance, or dignity. So in a way, I think you are close to, let's say, Michael Sandel when he talks about against perfection, or McIntyre, or Taylor, even Richard Rorty. Do you feel comfortable if I put you close to these other philosophers, let's say?
I do. I sympathize with pragmatism. My own source there is John Dewey, who very much argued for a democratic politics and education, but also had some interesting ideas on ethics, pluralist ideas, and ideas that don't see ethics as in a fundamentalist way, but try to have a more experimental and situational kind of ethics. I also sympathize with more communitarian approaches. I think they're right to look also at ancient Greece and so on to see like what's happening there. The only danger there for me is that I also don't that it can get too romantic, too much primitivist, as you call it, and also that basically we cannot just transplant ideas from that time and that context, the context of a Greek city-state, a polis, to contemporary nation states or global problems. And so for me, a big question which has not been solved yet and which requires much more resources also in political philosophy, but also in philosophy of media and technology is how can we still use some ideas like virtue, community, and so on in this global context in the modern world that we have today. So I think we need a lot of creativity there to take the good aspects from these ideas, but still then see what can we do now with them. And I don't have the big answers there, but I think that there is a source of inspiration that we should tap into. Also, intercultural dialogue and learning is very important. I think we need more. So if we don't like the kind of culture that we have now, or if we see at least partly some fundamental problems in it, we can also take inspiration from different cultures and in that sense also cultures that have still some pre-modern aspects, for example, and see how they deal with the world, with each other, how they what kind of worldviews they have, and so on. So yeah, in that way we can try to find an alternative, because we cannot just out of the blue create something new. We always need to relate somehow to the old. And then the question is, what is then the source for our inspiration? Because otherwise, if we don't do that, we have the blueprint model, the social engineering model that we had in the 20th century, where totalitarian regimes on all kinds of sides of the political spectrum were trying out that idea to start from zero, to leave no stone unturned. And I think that's a very dangerous idea, and we need to approach things in different ways. I think we should by now have learned that lesson, and try to see in the given what is interesting, and look beyond our present time to the past and to other cultures.
Andrea, please, you are almost.
I mean, the basic thing is that I fully agree with everything I've heard from Mark in this last part, and I think really the key word that you mentioned is community here. And if you somehow link this to the original question, Andrea, you asked about, what does it mean going back to nature? I think that what we're witnessing, I think all of us know people who have, left the city and went back to somewhere else. The big thing here is to understand whether they're doing this in the spirit of the recognition that nature can give them things that they haven't gotten so far, and if they understand that it should be the other way around as well, and that we must develop a stewardship of nature, which is why I was referring to your keyword community in the very global sense, a community not only of humans, but of all living species and beyond. I'm quite optimistic. I think we can interpret some of the movement we are looking at in the right sense. I think there is a growing awareness and motivation of people to go back to nature, not only because they want to enjoy nature, but also because they understand that it's vital for humans to contribute to the stewardship of nature, and then there is positive feedback. So let's hope I'm not being too optimistic.
Thank you very much. Now the last question, Mark, because we are just about to finish. Perfect. And the question could be kind of summary of the conversation. So we would like you to explain to us in the time you need, what kind of good society and good politics with technology do you want, or do you would like to happen in the future? What positive scenario, what vision do you have to inspire us?
Well, I learned a lot from other philosophers, and what it kind of, for me, an important idea that connects some of these philosophers is what I call a relational view of human being and of the world, and that means a more social view, but also one that, to pick up the previous comment from Andrea, that deals with the natural environment in a different way, so relates to nature in a different way. I think that's very, very important. So once we have this different way of thinking, then a lot of other things follow from it. We see technology in its social cultural context. We see others not necessarily as barriers or competitors, but also as partners in a larger picture and movement towards this more ethical and better world. And I think if we take that attitude, we can also through taking a different relation to nature, live on this planet in a different way. And I'm also very optimistic there, because I see that a lot of young people support these ways of thinking, and that they also really want also political change, because it's not enough to have a philosophical idea. One also needs to do things, and I think philosophers can contribute to that too, by using their, all their capacities of reflection and thinking, not only to think about, what world do we want and what is the ethical, but also more about the how should we do things. I think philosophers can, together with engineers and scientists, think about like how can we change things, and then finally the who question, the question of politics and a social, can we have, if we think in this more relational way, can we have a more inclusive world where also, for example, sentient animals can be included, and where technologies can be seen as not separate external things, but as human things that are part of our performances. And if we take that kind of more relational and inclusive view, I think that's that's going to help us to find out, and we will have to, like always, we will have to try out an experiment. I think it would be wrong to ask from philosophers or scientists, for that matter, like sort of fixed solutions. I think that's also a problem with transhumanism, the solutionism, this technological solutionism. Instead, we need to recognize the limits, and we also need to, let these solutions and directions grow, and without immediately controlling or implementing them, but also give that space to humanity at large, but also to concrete people to try out things. And to work together for a better technological future, but one that is not going to be the singularity, but one that is one in the making, that is poetically created in a process where humans and non-humans participate.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much. I apologize first to all people watching us and listening to us and sending long comments and questions, because we were so selfish to ask only questions ourselves. But we appreciate very much the questions, and we will integrate these questions on our works. And thank you very much. And also thanks, Andrea, of course, and thanks, Mark. I'm just finishing your latest book on the Green Leviathan. It's a lot of fun, not just interesting and clever. I enjoy a lot, and I recommend a lot, because it's really pedagogic in a sense, really easy to read and deep on the ideas. And I'm anxious to get your latest book on self-improvement, but apparently it's going to come in a number of months. So July or August is going to come.
I finished the proof, so I hope it can come earlier.
But I already bought it, so I'm anxious to get it. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mark and Andrea.
Thank you very much for the questions. Also, Andrea, nice to talk. Was a pleasure.
Thank you, Mark.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.